Welcome to the CloudBees Software Delivery Professional Series. For today, we have a great lineup for you, a fantastic panel. And as you know, today we're going to talk about optimizing Jenkins for the enterprise. With us today, we have Mark. Mark, could you give a brief introduction?
Sure, I'm Mark Waite. I'm the maintainer of the Jenkins Git plugin. I've been with CloudBees for an extended period, and I've been a Jenkins committer and contributor for even longer than that. I'm the documentation officer and delighted to be involved in trying to help grow the Jenkins community.
Thank you. Darren.
Hi, I'm Darren Pope. I am one of the developer advocates for CloudBees, came in through services a few years ago and made that strange transition into marketing, and it gets even stranger by the day. So,
good strange. And Joost, please.
Hey, I'm Joost van der Vriend. Yeah, I joined CloudBees a few years ago, also as professional services. Previous to that, I was working at a CloudBees customer, helping scale our CloudBees installation. And a few months ago, I made the jump to product management, where one of the things I am responsible for is configuration as code.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you. And I'm Hope Lynch, your moderator for this series. Today, we're going to talk about many topics, but the primary ones, scaling Jenkins pipelines, how to manage Jenkins with configuration as code, and what future configuration as code looks like. Encouraging you to add your questions. If you already have some that are top of mind, please go ahead and add them to the attendee chat, which you will find the button all the way to the right in your list of icons. If you click that button, you'll be put into the attendee chat, and then you can communicate with us. Some of the house rules that we always say at these, please be engaged. We are having this session for you to answer questions that you have and help you in your day-to-day work. So make sure you post those questions. As you do, be respectful. Everyone can see what you're posting. The questions should be considerate of your fellow attendees. If you are not, disrespectful attendees will be dismissed. To date, we have not had to do that, and we definitely don't want to start today. And be responsive. Let us know if this session is working for you. Are we providing information that's going to help you? Is it answering the questions that you came here for? If not, let us know. And we will also have a survey that will be sent after the webcast. Please take some time to answer that and help us understand if we're meeting your needs. And if you found the attendee chat, go ahead and give it a try. Let us know where you're joining from. See if there's someone in your neighborhood or your region of the world. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to our panelists to get started.
Mark, how do you scale a Jenkins pipeline?
Well, so this story is, for me, about common mistakes that people might make that will sabotage their ability to scale a Jenkins pipeline.
Wait, hang on a second.
Go ahead.
People can sabotage themselves when creating a pipeline?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a very, very common experience that we see many people asking questions that lead us to understand, oh dear, you've gone down a very dangerous path. And that very dangerous path shows that you don't understand some crucial key technical concepts about Jenkins pipeline. And the lack of those key technical concepts means you're going to make scalability mistakes that will hurt you terribly.
What is probably that top one? There has to be what's the one thing that people do wrong?
Yeah, the biggest and the most glaring one is that the Jenkins pipeline is a domain-specific language, putting emphasis on the word language. They see it as a programming language, and they make the mistake of deciding, oh, I need to write everything in this programming language. It's a lovely little language. It runs things very, very well, nice expressive nature, etc. But when they choose to, hey, I have a programming language, therefore I need to write a significant program in it, they have made a serious mistake architecturally by putting too much work in the wrong place. So the crucial architectural thing here is that the core of Jenkins pipeline code should be considered to be running on the controller. Because it's running on the controller, Jenkins users should be mindful that everything that they express in the Jenkins pipeline domain-specific language may be sitting competing with every other Jenkins user on the controller running it. So they've got to correct. Go ahead, Darren.
Well, it boils down to you've got scripted syntax and declarative syntax. And what you've been talking about up to this point is scripted syntax, correct?
Right. Good example is that if I'm tempted to put a bunch of conditionals, a bunch of flow control logic, or a bunch of make requests for this or that using scripted syntax, I could do myself serious damage on the performance side of my controller.
Okay, so if I'm going down that path and I'm starting to write things as you're defining it, my word though, incorrectly, what would be the correct way to do things? If everything's running on the controller, isn't that what's there for?
And the controller certainly is there to execute pipelines, but it's much better to delegate individual steps of the pipeline to command line calls that execute on the agent. So instead of doing a bunch of conditionals inside the pipeline DSL, put those conditionals inside your build script and call the build script from the pipeline.
But what if I don't have any agents connected to my controller?
Oh, then you've made another disastrous mistake in scaling Jenkins pipelines, because the first rule of this operation is be sure you use agents. So good point. If you're using a Jenkins controller and have defined no agents, step one should be define at least one agent and use that agent instead of executing on the controller.
The subtext to that also is make sure that your controller executor count is set to 0.
0, that's right. 0 is the right answer, because anything other than 0 on recent Jenkins long-term support releases will get you a nice warning from the administrative monitor system that says you should set your executor count to 0. So in terms of scale, that's another threat to scaling a Jenkins pipeline. If you're running Jenkins jobs on the controller, you are sacrificing controller performance to that Jenkins job. So there's another reason why you should not run jobs on the Jenkins controller. Don't use Jenkins controller capacity for things that could be passed off to an agent, so that as you grow and develop, more and more work can be passed out to agents.
Hi, we have one question that might be timely from Brendan. Does your sabotage warning apply to declarative pipelines that run more on agents than the controller?
That's an excellent point, and I think that's where Darren was actually leading us towards, is that I was describing scripted, and Darren's guidance, I think, would be your first preference actually is probably just start with declarative pipeline. Don't go to scripted until there is something that you prove conclusively you have to do scripted, because declarative naturally leads you away from the kinds of scaling mistakes that I was describing. Declarative is a simpler expression. It's a simpler way of doing things. It's computed at startup of the pipeline instead of continual execution during pipeline. So declarative is much better as a way to avoid risks of scalability problems.
Excellent.
Darren, do you have insights you want to share there in terms of declarative versus scripted?
Yeah, one of the things that we've recommended over time is stick with declarative. In other words, keep it as simple for as long as possible. When you need to start making that next step of, and the usual smell that I see is when I see a script block show up inside of a declarative pipeline, then that's when I'm starting to think, okay, maybe I need to extract that script block that put in the declarative pipeline and put it into a shared library step, because now my declarative still looks good, and by marrying together the declarative and the shared library, I could probably take care of 95, 98% of all use cases that I would typically run into. But then, as Mark was saying, is what about scripted? Now, when Pipeline started out in 2016, if I remember the dates correct, the only option was scripted by then, and declarative came in at a time after that. So the process of moving from declarative to declarative plus shared library now over to scripted, there are some use cases to where scripted does make sense. One of those is I'm needing to figure out the number of the specific number of agents that I want to use on the fly. Let's say I've got a big pool of hardware, and let's say it's firmware controllers for hard drives or something, just making up something right now. I've got a big pool, and I'm just going to go out and scan. It's like, okay, who's available to work? I want whoever's available to work. Unfortunately, or fortunately, scripted is the right way to sort of figure out what agents are available for me, so I'm dynamically building out that pipeline on the fly.
And I think that's a good example. It is not accurate to say that declarative will solve every problem. There are cases where scripted is the right solution. However, declarative is a great begin point and a great continue point until that spot where you discover, oh, I've got something that I absolutely have to do in scripted. And just as Darren said, a crucial step is look at using a shared library first. Now, is there some risk in those shared libraries that I might still put too much code executing on the controller? I assume there is, isn't there, Darren?
Absolutely. You could still hurt yourself pretty badly. So even when you're writing inside of a shared library step, I'm going to use that phrasing, that can go completely sideways, and you don't want to do that. So you still want to get down into an SH or BAT or PowerShell step, so that way you know that one of those three are actually running down on an agent where the real work, the real material work should be happening.
Thank you. Yeah. Now, Hope, I see that there's some other questions in the chat. Is it okay if we bring one or two of those questions in?
Absolutely. I was just waiting for the right moment.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
No. Hey, this is collaborative. You know, we're just here having a big conversation. One question from Jacob. Does setting the Jenkins controller to 0 executors impact flyweight tasks like multi-branch pipeline change scans?
Negative.
So as far as I know, it does not. However, there's a side question later that sort of touches on that. What about if I need to do, if there's a job that absolutely must execute on the controller? And there are some jobs like that where you're saying, I'm running a backup of the controller that I'd like to launch from the controller. Well, with my Jenkins instance, I've used techniques occasionally where I'll enable a Jenkins executor on the controller briefly and then turn it off again, so that I keep people off the controller. There are cases.
But that's a very small list of cases.
Absolutely. Well, and you should not allow those cases unless you absolutely prove, because many people now are running Jenkins on an AWS where the file system will do snapshotting for them. Use your better ways to do backup anytime you can. Yeah.
Okay. Spencer has asked, with the master executor count to 0, how are tasks against the master performed? For example, automated backups on job archives, cloud config, automated updates, etc.
Yeah, so there the argument is first choice is run those outside of Jenkins. Another possible would be run them from a cron job, for instance, on the controller itself. Another would be the technique I use of, hey, briefly enable the controller execution, then disable it. And for me, that's worked. It's acceptable at my size.
Right, and that's, Mark is speaking of a controller he is the only person on. If you're working inside of an enterprise organization, I would probably never disable executors ever.
Right.
Yeah. So
then it says you've got to. Go ahead, Jos.
Yeah. So I was thinking, like, if you're running, for example, the controller in something like Kubernetes, you could also do backups on the volume and avoid the problem of having to run an executor, right? There's more creative options there. So think about those things. Like, I think as Mark said, is like, try to think about, okay, do I need to run this through Jenkins itself, or is there a way where I can run this from outside of Jenkins to avoid having to run into this problem.
Excellent. Last question we have for now from Leo. Having moved most processing over to agents, how can we minimize load on the controller for binary archiving steps?
So I think
good question.
Answer, yeah, that is an excellent question. I think the answer there is invoke the artifact archiving step on the agent so that you're using an archiving process that has the agent communicate to a separate repository system. Don't use the controller as the artifact repository. Darren, you want to give some more insights there?
I do. There's two really simple examples, just because I come from the Java ecosystem. You would use Maven deploy or use Gradle publish, and just let all of that happen down on the agent. If your artifacts are going back to your controller, that's a pretty big smell, and definitely cannot be long-term scalable. If your artifacts are really, really small, you might get away with it, but even then, at some point, there will be a tipping point that you will say, what's going on? So if you're doing artifact storage on your controller, I would recommend stop doing that today and then start using some sort of binary repository, whether it's open source, commercial, or even just file system. Just don't do it on the controller itself.
Yeah, we've seen exactly that pattern on the ci.jenkins.io instance, where there was a period where we told people, oh, just download this binary from ci.jenkins.io. We've now long since switched to even our incremental builds get uploaded to our artifact repository, and we point people to the artifact repository rather than looking at the CI server. Because, hey, artifact repositories are really good at serving artifacts.
Gee, that seems really strange, doesn't it? Use something that was built to do?
Right.
It's a good idea.
We have one more, and I think if more questions are posted, I will hold those unless they are extremely on topic. One from Rohit: is it a good idea to run parallel stage execution? Please extend your answer with parallel execution on different agents labels as well. And does this help with scaling?
It parallel absolutely, and it helps massively with scaling. So we've seen lots of examples in the Jenkins project. Darren highlighted some examples he's seen commercially of customers who get dramatic improvements by allowing themselves to scale out onto many agents simultaneously. We do it when we evaluate a proposed change to certain compatibility setups. It runs on 20 or 30 agents continue at the same time, and the parallel works just great.
I can't say anything better than that.
I'd like to add one or two things to that. Especially if you're looking to further parallel, I think parallel execution is very well done with Declarative. It really helps you well. It has a few options. You have there's really good blog posts introducing this on Jenkins.io website. So there's the parallel task, there's the sequential task, and the I think it's matrix, which each of these three features capabilities has their own way of dealing with a certain scenario. For example, the matrix scenario is, okay, I need to run this on, I need to run multiple things on multiple targets. So I'm going to run Java 8, 11, 17 on Windows and Linux and macOS. So I get 9. And with the matrix one, you can say, I need to do this at once. You can make the label, dynamic, and then you can use the appropriate agent to run that on all 9 agents in parallel. We're doing very little work. And to do that same with scripted means you would have to manage that, whereas if you use Declarative, it gets managed for you.
Okay.
All right. Please continue. We're going to hold the other questions for a little later.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we've talked pipeline for a little bit here, but one of the other things we see from a user perspective a lot is people think that they actually need to use plugins. Now, this is going to be a very contentious few moments. Do you really need plugins? Now, the plugin that Mark maintains, Git plugin, the answer is yes. You don't want to write that every time. You don't want to have to implement that for every job you do. But do you need plugins to interact with artifact repositories? We've sort of already talked about that, right? Use the tooling that you already have. Should people just say, hey, I need this plugin just because? What's the answer for that?
And I think the answer there is no, right? Be very careful. I agree with you. The example you highlighted of, oh, I've got a job that needs to do a deploy. Should I install a plugin that will help me do the deployment? If you do that, now your developers from their desktop can't do the same steps to diagnose and debug. So you've actually sacrificed part of the developer experience by putting something outside of developer accessible actions. So I think it's good to say, hey, put everything you can into your scripts and let them do the lifting, let them do the work, deploy, let them do the updates of servers, etc. It's best to let them do it without installing a Jenkins plugin to assist.
Yes, do you want to add in something on plugins?
Yeah, well, to add to there, I think I've also had the question often after that. Okay, but then what do I do if I need to, calculate something, if I need to combine something, and my first answer would be like, look at your build tooling. Do they have plugins? Do they have plugins like Maven or Gradle? They have lots of plugins that might do something. But if not, I would always recommend having built like a small CLI, like a small binary yourself. Why? Because you can do proper unit testing. You can evolve it over time. And nowadays, there's so many ways in which you can distribute that CLI. For example, if you use Kubernetes as a target platform, you can put it in a container. It's very easy to use that way, very easy to distribute. And it means that everyone can run that container or that CLI on their own machine as well. And that means that you don't have to worry about, okay, is this tied to this particular Jenkins? It also means when you upgrade, you don't have to worry about, will this upgrade break it? Will the plugin now, and is the plugin still maintained? Again, I would stress that keep them very small and specific. Then they're the most useful.
Right. You have to be very cognizant as a user of when your administrators are actually upgrading your Jenkins instances. I have seen in the past that people will have Jenkins instances that can no longer be upgraded because the plugins that they require force them to stay on an older version of Jenkins because they have tied themselves into that plugin. The plugin has been abandoned and it only works a certain way, and people just aren't willing to rewrite their jobs. So therefore they are stuck. And that's a bad situation to be in. I want to sort of tie together the pipeline and the plugin, or what, not plugin, but the CLI thing that Joost was just talking about. In a perfect world, your pipeline as declarative, or even if you had to go scripted, its main job in life is going to be the flow control of what's going on and then getting out to SHBAT or PowerShell and calling those CLIs, whether it's CLIs that are provided to you or CLIs that you have written. Because what Joost said is a very important item, that being able to correctly unit test your CLIs, whether your CLI is actually just a Python script or maybe you've written a standalone CLI in Go, you can test all those because guess what? Going back to what Mark originally said, remember that pipeline is a DSL, a domain-specific language. A DSL is not a programming language, period. So by working with real programming languages to where you can put real things around them and then you insert whatever those things are that you built into your pipelines, those pipelines are going to be much more scalable and, more importantly to me, more stable over time. Come on. Somebody help me out here. Don't leave me hanging.
You got it right. I've wholehearted agreement. The story of, hey, if I choose to move things out of developer hands inside Jenkins, I am sacrificing something. And one way of moving it out is that choice, I'm going to install a plugin. And I'm going to let the plugin do it. Well, I've just now moved a capability purely into Jenkins, that I might be better served keeping that capability in the hands of the people who can develop it. And I love your note that it is much easier to write tests for Java, for C#, for C++, for Go, for Kotlin, than it is to write tests for scripted pipeline. It's just easier. So stay there.
And speaking of that subject, in the subject of scaling Jenkins pipelines and testing, if you feel the need to have to test your pipelines, that's a cue of, okay, you've probably gone too far. You've probably put too much logic in your pipelines. If you really feel like if we don't test this, if we don't write unit tests for our Jenkins pipelines, that should be a cue like, okay, wait, we probably have gone too far. We should reevaluate what we've created.
It's back to that seductive nature of many of us are computer programmers, and we think that every computer programming language that we get access to should be used to write computer programs. And in this case, avoid the temptation. Write your code in script, in shell, in batch, or in PowerShell, or in the Makefile or Maven or Gradle of your choice.
And then just have your pipelines call those things. Done.
Right.
Okay. So up to this point, we've been talking about users and how they deal with it. But we want to talk a couple of things around administrators of a Jenkins instance. And we sort of teased it a little bit of talking about plugins. If you come to your Jenkins administrator and say, hey, look, I need this plugin, their first through 198th answer will be no, or should be no, if they're being polite. And there are cases to where a plugin does make sense. But if I would say the vast majority of the time, it does not make sense to have a plugin that does things specifically inside of my pipeline to go and do something on an agent. That just typically just doesn't pan out well in the long run. So as an administrator, if you are the administrator, if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I need these plugins, your first answer is, Mark?
No. And that's the polite one. There are more harsh answers that come later.
Yes. And I'm trying to remember what the next point was. Oh, yeah. Here's the other reason why you want to be able to do that. Think about this. You've got plugins that are going on. If you do a clean install of a Jenkins controller today, I didn't do the final count, but it was somewhere around 60 or 70 plugins that get installed during an install suggested plugins, if I remember right. It's a very small number. But I have seen, and I know Yoast has seen, controllers with hundreds, i.e. greater than 300 plugins installed. Those become, our favorite word, a Jenkinstein. Or that's one of the factors of a Jenkinstein, not the only factor.
Yes.
Again, we want to be able to upgrade and maintain because security is a big deal. So the less plugins you install, the easier, in theory, it should be to maintain your infrastructure. True or false?
True.
Definitely true.
Okay. So I got a true, I got a definitely true. Hope, you have to vote on this one too. What do you think?
Absolutely true.
Absolutely true. Okay. So if we're doing the right things, as an administrator, I'm saying no. And I'm trying to minimize the number of plugins. I'm being very thoughtful. Then what's the next step? If I'm sitting here and hand curating a controller, it seems like I'm wasting a lot of time. And that should be turned into some sort of declaration. Hint, hint. This is called configuration as code, people. Right, I'm trying to help us transition here just a little bit.
Yeah, and I think configuration as code and talking to administrators is the next step. Let's go there.
So as we're talking about configuration as code, in the Jenkins ecosystem today, if you wanted to completely configure your controller as code, I'm very careful in how I'm saying as code because it's not really code. We've talked about scripted syntax, declarative syntax. It's not any of that. But there's really three big pieces that you have to wire together to make that happen. Mark, can you name off those three?
Yeah, so one piece is the Jenkins administration components. So what are the settings for my security? What are the settings for various plugin configurations? What are the credentials being in use? Then the next piece is the plugin configuration. And the plugin configuration is somewhat independent. And then the third and final piece is the job configuration. Those three things combined together allow me to manage my Jenkins as code. But without one of the three, I'm really missing an important piece.
And which one of those, or did you just mean by if I miss any of those, I'm sort of missing something?
Right. If I drop any of them, I've now still got a piece that I need to manage interactively.
Okay. So the first one is JCasC, right? Jenkins Configuration as Code, shortened to JCasC. Right? It's a plugin that you install, you export things, you make changes to the files, and you can re-import them, and life is happy, correct?
Right.
If you like YAML files.
Yes. You need to like YAML files. That's good, Joost. I like that.
So that's JCasC. So that covers the configuration of the controller itself. Now, plugins, right? Because there are some plugins that we need to install that aren't there by default with install suggested plugins. Like one you might like to have that is actually reasonably useful is pipeline utility steps. There's a couple of steps in there that help me a lot just for doing some normal things, but it's not included as part of install suggested plugins. So how do we manage plugins, or how could we manage plugins?
Yeah, and the technique I've found works best for me has been to use a plugins.txt file with the plugin installation manager tool. So I manage my system configuration with Jenkins configuration as code plugin, and I use the plugin installation manager tool with a plugins.txt file to track exactly the plugin name and the precise version that I'm using to track that. Now, that means I have some management overhead, because when I need a new plugin version, I have to enter that into that file and run some command line tools to get that and prepare it. But for me, that was the piece. Jenkins configuration as code plus plugin installation manager tool.
Okay. So assuming we've got that right? Just magic hand wave, that works. Now we have to manage jobs. I'm going to go run away for a moment while Mark answers, or Joost answers this one. I'm going to go screaming around in my backyard.
Okay, this is a fun one. Joost, I propose you give the answer on how it's being done right now, because my voice will sort of sound jaded.
Right. Maybe I could be less jaded and less screaming in the garden. So I believe one of the common ways you can do this is use the job DSL plugin, which might incidentally bring us back to where we started this session. There's other tools like Jenkins Job Builder. I'm not sure how much it's used today. I was a contributor to that, so I do have fond memories of that. You could always use directly manage the XML files. I do not recommend that. You can write something else by yourself and use the APIs, but I would also not recommend that. So yeah, that kind of leaves us with the situation of having a probably outdated tool, not as often used anymore, with the Jenkins Job Builder and then the job DSL. And maybe it's good if Darren and Mark give their judgment, or at least their opinion on how good it is to use that one.
Yeah, so I've not yet switched to job DSL. So I'm one of the people in the dark place that Joost referenced of I'm still storing config XML files for my job definition. So yes, there is some shame hiding there, but it's been easier for me to do that than to learn the job DSL and adapt to it. So one of my hesitations with job DSL is I've found it daunting personally. Darren, maybe you have some others to offer in terms of better ways or different ways that I should be considering.
Well, for today's world with the Jenkins controller, then your only options really are job DSL, Jenkins Job Builder, which is, sorry, Yoast, super old, doing the XML, like mark what you're doing. I think that's legitimate, but you're setting up a separate XML for every job, and then you're using the Jenkins CLI to manage it. So that's sort of like how you're doing your work with plugin installation manager, right? But nothing wrong with that. It's a pattern that works. Or you have people that are actually using, init Groovy scripts to manage job creation, which feels very, very strange to me. There's also some parts of it that are pretty cool because in theory, then your controller is completely idempotent and nothing is changing unless it's done via that definition, period, right? That is sort of the upside, but the problem is most people don't lock it down to that point. They do some things where it's configured manually and some stuff that's coming in as code, and that always ends up in a very bad way.
I like that observation. That's a good hint to our audience. One of the temptations or seductive things here is to not realize that if users are making changes and we're not reflecting them in code, the next time we bring this thing back from code, we may lose their changes. So it's quite important to have a systematic way of approaching that. There is the facility in Jenkins that will allow you to disable system configuration, but I think Darren makes a good point. Most people don't disable system configuration. They don't make it read-only. And by choosing to not do that, they've now accepted the burden that they have to keep their configuration as code definition on disk in their source repository up to date with the changes that might be made by system administrators in their Jenkins system.
If there was only a solution that I didn't have to sort of use duct tape and baling wire to put all this together. Does such a thing exist?
And the answer is it does.
Yoast.
No, it does. It does.
That's your cue, bud.
Sorry. Yeah, so, we're here from CloudBees, right? So what do we do with CloudBees? One of the things we do is we sell CloudBees CI, which is based upon Jenkins. And what we try to do is to go a bit beyond what Jenkins offers out of the box and see if there are some of these things where we feel like, okay, this is sort of a friction point with Jenkins. Can we do better for our customers? So on the subject of configuration as code, I'm the product manager, so I've taken that to task. So one of the things we're doing is trying to bring the plugin management into the same fold as configuration as code. So where you're using Jenkins configuration as code in the same way, you can then add a plugin definition. And we're also in the process of doing the exact same for job management. So
and that's a key thing right now is it's in process though, right? So yeah. In the latest release that came out in the last week of August, I believe, is that correct?
Yep.
My weeks are running together. Okay, so that was the initial preview release of where an operations center can be managed with configuration as code, correct?
Correct, and the first few, I would say, we call them the usual suspects of job types, which we believe should be able to be managed at least decently. We found some issues, as always. I mean, it's software. So those would be freestyle jobs, pipeline, multi-branch, and the organization folders, job types like GitHub organization and Bitbucket team project job type, which are now to be configured, can be configured with basically the same style as YAMLs as you can do with JCasC. And if you are happening to be a CloudBees CI customer, when you do an export, just like you would do with JCasC, you would actually get those files, those definitions exported as well.
So Yoast, you said in a very few words something that for me is a little bit breathtaking. All the energy that I spend managing plugin version numbers is now simplified dramatically because of the CloudBees Assurance program and a few additional plugins I might add through this configuration as code in CloudBees CI. And you're adding job configuration definitions as well. So instead of 3 components for me to track my configuration. It's one thing centrally done in the operations center.
Yes, that is true. We also have an option to sort of have a very limited, but sort of like an inheritance flow where you can extend. So what we've seen is that what people really like to do, so sort of on the side way answering one of the questions in the chat, having more than one controller to sort of spread the load of or giving teams their own controller. And then what we see is that the central administrator would like to say, okay, everybody needs to have this space configuration. Everybody needs to have these shared libraries. Everybody needs to have these tool configurations because it's going to have the same agents they use, maybe, right? Things like that. And then you can put that in a what we call a bundle, so a collection of Jenkins configuration, plugin, and job definition files. And then you can say, well, I now create a specific one for a controller and say I inherit from the base bundle where I have all the shared configuration. So
gee, I could do it all by hand. So here, I'm going to play the sales guy for a moment, right? Because Mark's already said it, or Joost, you said it, right? We're CloudBees. I'm going to play the sales guy for a minute. I could either do it all myself. We have laid out for you how you can do it with Jenkins. Right? You can use JCasC. We recommend JCasC. Use Plugin Installation Manager, and then pick your flavor of how to do job management. We said job DSL, just managing the raw config XMLs, Jenkins Job Builder, in whatever state it's in, or you're doing some sort of init Groovy script to manage the jobs. You can do that. Mm-hmm. Or you can come and take a look at CloudBees CI. It's all nice, wrapped, pretty, and centrally managed. And in large organizations, that's a big deal.
It is. Go ahead, Joost. Sorry.
All right. I'll say I'm reminiscing of my old days as an administrator, with an older version of CloudBees CI, where this was not there yet, where Jenkins configuration didn't exist yet, and trying to get everything up to date, everything correct, that was a lot of work. We had to build our own automation, but that basically means that across the, you're looking at a year where you have basically a few people the whole year working on maintaining your own automation, your own way of keeping all the things up to date. And I always look at when we try to build new features in the product to say, okay, can we reduce the burden on those people? Can we make their work week, less about minutiae of managing their CloudBees controllers? And I believe we are succeeding. We are reducing the workload, and great configuration as code. I think that's one of the bigger things we can do to really make it easier, also to not just manage it, but also to understand the state. So I think that is another thing that can contribute to being able to update more often and being more confident in your updates. If you know the state it's in, and if you want to do an update, you can take a look at what's different, and you have a good idea of what is different, what is going to change. So there's more room for us to work on understanding the actual, the difference between if they haven't locked it down, what's the diff between what you've loaded and what is currently live. But that's something that's on our roadmap as well to look at. So we have some other things that we're working on to hopefully reduce that burden and basically give you back some of your time.
Now wait, why would we want to give administrators back time? They're supposed to be working 24/7, right?
Well, 18/7, right?
Okay, 18/7. Okay.
No, but so personally, I will feel like what I generally would, if I were in the same role, right, and I have been in the same role, what I would like them to do is that they were able to spend more time on building out new things, new automations, new options, get closer to the self-service developer platform, which I'm sure a lot of you listening here would love to have, right? And my gut feeling says that for a lot of you, the reason why you're not getting there is because keeping the lights on stuff is taking too much of your time.
Yeah, and the CloudBees configuration as code is hopefully going to help minimize some of that keeping the lights on as it continues to mature. Again, configuration as code for CloudBees controllers has been out for a few months, but in the most recent release, which was 2.303.1.6, that's where we have preview for configurations code for the Operations Center and also for the items, meaning the job types of freestyle, pipeline, multi-branch, and the 2 org jobs of GitHub and Bitbucket. So,
yeah, I love the idea of shifting some of the burden of managing and administering onto the CloudBees CI code. I think that's an elegant solution. You've identified a problem that at least I have real and personal experience with. How do I manage my installation with all these different components? And you've combined them into a single conceptual thing that I can think about, that I can use, that I can reason about, that I can look at the changes and see what's changing. I love that. Thank you very much, Joost.
Okay. All right, so that's enough of a pitch, right? Everybody's fed up with the sales pitch. Let's get to the questions. Hope, do you have some questions to go ahead and...
We have so many questions. Okay. Some of them are a little bit of a backtrack, but I think we'll be good with that. Any hardware recommendations for agents and controllers like CPU, RAM, disk, etc.?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Next.
Oh, no, wait a sec. Stop it. You're not going to get away that easily, Darren. No way. Yes. I think you should run agents on System 390 mainframes, on ARM 64, on PowerPC, and on AMD 64, because they run great on all of them. And
specs. Let's get serious for just a second.
Okay.
I would. It's going to depend. I'm going to go back to my services days. It depends. What is it that you're trying to do? If I am trying to build a C++ or a C app, and I'm doing, my makefile is set up to where I'm needing a lot of cores just to do the build, I'm going to get as many cores so I can get that work done faster. If I'm building iOS or Mac apps, I need a Mac. Would I get an M1 today? Have we seen any M1s? Completely breaking the fourth wall.
Yes.
Mark, have you seen M1s for you?
We've got users. In fact, our release officer runs an M1. So absolutely. And he loves it. He thinks it's great.
The reason why I was waffling there for just a second. Go ahead, Hub.
Yeah, I was about to say, I think probably the best way to run builds on a Mac, and if you want to use M1, there's the Mac Minis.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Yeah. And there's those, speaking from experience, they can be very good build agents.
Yeah. I think really, though, minimum 4 gig RAM, disk is as fast of a disk you can throw at it. I'm not going to say as large of a disk as you can throw at it. I mean, it may not matter, especially if it's SSD. CPU count. Again, it depends on what you're building. You may be fine with just a quad-core machine. The thing you want to be careful of is taking a very large machine, like a 40-core, 128 gig RAM machine, and then putting 100 executors on that machine. A typical rule of thumb is to set the executor count not to exceed the number of cores you have. So if you have a 40-core machine, don't go more than 40 executors. In the best case scenario is you have a single executor per agent, period.
Yeah, to add on top of that,
go ahead, Joost.
To add on top of that, one of the things that can happen if you do more than one agent more than one executor per agent is that certain build tools, they don't really tell you, but they're using specific folders for temporary data. And not all build tools are created equal. I won't name them, but some build tools are more prone for having conflicts on this than others. And it might happen in certain OSs more than others, but those things can be quite complicated. So if you have to do them, if you have to use more than one executor slot, more than one agent definition per an actual agent machine, make sure that different users have different caching folders and so on. And as Darren said, it depends. Like I've seen native, I'll say for Java, I think one of the things that we're becoming quite hot is making with things like Micronaut and Quarkus to create a Graal native image. I've seen those builds take up about 12 gigabytes of RAM. You probably do not want to run any other significant build process on the same VM as that process is running on.
Right.
But on the other hand, I've seen Golang binary builds that take a few seconds, which don't take up more, even a gigabyte of RAM. You can probably run multiple at the same time. So look at what you're doing. And
let's use a real example. Mark, you maintain the Git plugin. What does your agent farm look like?
So yeah, good. Know your systems. My agent farm typically is single agent per computer that's providing the executor. Each of those computers will at most have 2 cores maybe. So they're relatively lightweight, and I spread the load by agents. Now that one is not very massively parallelized, right? Whereas the Jenkins project has some Docker build systems where we can get massively parallel. So we've got 4 or 8 cores, still a single agent, and the build tool farms it out. So I think the answer that Darren and Joost have both said is know your build tool and measure various configurations to see the one that works best for you. For me, single agent is great.
Hope, what's next?
All right. So future of config as code. More to say?
I think Joost sort of explained it pretty well.
All right. Excellent. Excellent.
Well, there's maybe one more thing I could add.
One more?
Okay.
All right.
It's one thing because I just want to, so for those listening, right? Right. Again, it's a little bit of a sales pitch, right? So I wanted to say something on that line. Like, while we will focus on making sure that it will be great for CloudBees customers, and that we will make sure that all the CloudBees features will be supported with configuration as code in that single way of working, right? As Darren described. That should not stop us from where we see fit, where it makes sense, that we help out with the Jenkins configuration as code. We do leverage the Jenkins configuration as code. So if there are significant improvements that we can do that make sense there, they will come there as well. But as always, in this sense, our customers come first. We have to get that there. We have to make sure that all the things that our customers use will be supported. So I just wanted to make sure that that's clear. So for those of us, our customers listening, if you're using a feature from us, you don't see the support yet, either it will come, or if you don't see it coming anytime soon, there's always the request for enhancement process.
Excellent. Thank you. And I think everyone knows where this button is to be able to find additional information. 5 reasons enterprise grow from Jenkins to CloudBees. So that's available if you click the button at the bottom of your screen. If it is not, let us know. Let's go through additional questions that we have, and there are so many. So this might be a whirlwind round. So I think if each of you answers one of the questions, I don't know how you're going to decide, rock, paper, scissors. We probably can get through the rest of these. How we containerize Jenkins such that we separate out ephemeral data from configuration so that we can run it in Kubernetes. Who won this one?
So
I don't have a good answer for that one.
Yeah, I'm going to act like I've got a partial answer. It's go configuration as code, and admit that you're going to separate out your configuration to use it to drive that thing as you bring it up. That means that every time you need a new one, you start it.
Awesome.
So, but that's a pretty weak answer, and Darren's right that's the Kubernetes solution with Jenkins is still developing, still evolving.
Okay, awesome. Next one, with parallel execution on agents, are we talking strictly on the same controller or multiple controllers? We land into lots of RBAC and workspace buildup. Is that good advice?
So I'm not sure I'm getting the question there. For me, when I talk about parallel, it's always agent level, not using multiple controllers. But certainly the CloudBees solution has some interesting ways that you can use multiple controllers as well and pass work between them. But for me, agents are a facility that helps the specific controller spread the work out to other places.
Okay, thank you. What is the average build/stage/step duration recommendation or best practice?
Well, I can be mean. Everything should be below 5 minutes.
Yeah, but like to build the Linux core would take hours. So I think it just depends. I mean, however long it takes for your job to run, if you're running the step manually. So if you're saying Maven clean package, if that normally takes 5 minutes in a standalone environment, I would expect it not to run more than 5 minutes and 1 second.
Cool.
But,
all right.
I would say that depends. Like if you have a beefy machine, and the build process can use all the cores and your agents are smaller than that, you would expect it actually to be slower. So I think that's always a misconception I've seen at companies where the developers are complaining that their CI build is slower than on their machine. But if you look at the machine they have, it's like, yeah, of course, your laptop is 4 times as powerful as the build agent. So that's something I think also for both sides to understand, that if you want that to be the same, that means the agents need to be as beefy as the average developer laptop. So there's no hard number, right? There's no number you can set on that. One thing I would always recommend, though, is that if jobs take significant number of time, find a way to cut them up. Can they be done in different pieces? Can they be parallelized? Another thing that we've seen is that that people try and say, okay, we use a way to snapshot things, that we break them into pieces, get to a certain state, find a way to copy over that state, and then we trigger a second job or a third job and so on. Like even with pipelines, you can still do that. And then if something happens, you can always restart from a known point. And that means that even if they take long with good reason, a failure does not mean all the work is lost.
Okay, excellent. This one, if someone can answer in 30 seconds or less, so we can begin our closeout. When scaling in an enterprise setting, do you recommend multiple master instances per application supported versus a single master?
Yes.
I felt like that one was going to be an easy one to answer. I love it. All right. Thank you, everyone, for being so engaged today on this call. We landed in a spot that we don't very often, where we have more questions than we have had time. And again, thank you so much for joining. The recording will be made available. There will also be a survey. Please take some time to respond to the survey so that we can plan additional content that suits your needs and is interesting and hopefully as engaging as this has been today. I want to thank Joost, Darren, and Mark. Thank you so much for a great conversation.
Bye.
Thank you, Hope. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you.